I'm Julie, and welcome back to my Journal With Me series. Last week, I talked about Shadow and Bone and my personal obsession with the cast and the characters that they played. This video, I'll be briefly recapping Loki episodes 3 and 4, a continuation of my first Loki video and my first video ever, but a majority of my video will center around a sort of compare and contrast of Loki and Sylvie, why I think Sylvie was picked up by the TVA, and what I think about the timekeepers being nothing but puppets. We know that Loki's childhood was neglectful. Sure, he was a prince with a life of luxury, but we know from what he said and what we've seen is that he suffered a lot of emotional neglect. Loki was adopted, but he wasn't informed of his adoption for centuries of his life. Being adopted isn't the problem. I know people who have been adopted, and there are plenty of stories in which adoptive parents create a loving and nurturing home for their children. What the problem is that Loki could see that he never got the same treatment that Thor did. Thor was the golden child, the future king of Asgard, the guy that people wanted to be or wanted to sleep with. I always think back to that very first Thor movie where Loki is part of the group that consisted of Thor, Lady Sif, and the Warriors 3, but throughout the course of the film, Loki is always distanced from them. He feels like he's in the background. Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 are much closer with Thor, and they feel like his friends, and Loki just feels like the little sibling that's tagging along. Maybe Loki feels more distant because he's a trickster who plays pranks. In Ragnarok, Thor informs Valkyrie and Bruce of a time that Loki shifted into a snake, and then when Thor picked him up, Loki shifted back into himself and stabbed Thor. We also know from the memory loop in episode 4 of an instance where Loki cut off half of Sif's hair, and in the initial memory, Loki is amused by his own actions, while Sif is less than pleased. Which, side note, is taken from a real story in Norse mythology, in which Loki cuts off all of Sif's hair as a prank, which does not go so well for Loki. And yeah, those pranks suck to the person that Loki's pranking, but they aren't really the actions of an evil person. But Julie, I hear you saying, Loki stabbed Thor when they were children. And yes, that is an excellent point. Most siblings do not actually stab each other, but I do point out that a lot of siblings have thought about it. All jokes aside, I have to point out that Asgardians are significantly more durable than humans, and in addition to that, they were children. So they were a lot weaker than, say, an adult stabbing another adult. And in my personal opinion, with how Loki reacts to Thor telling the story, it's more of a joke to him as well. It's not like he had this malicious intent of murdering his brother. He just thought it would be funny. As the TVA explains it in episode 1, Loki's purpose in life, the sacred timeline, was to be a side character that propels heroes into action. In most ways, he seems to be doomed to fail, even in his death. What this show does for Loki is that it gives him control over his own story again. He gets to be the main character instead of a side character in everyone else's stories. And he has this chance to be more than what some higher power has dictated for him. Sylvie is this great contrast to Loki and all Loki variants. Unlike them, she presents predominantly female, and in fact she rejects the Loki name. She doesn't want who she is to be tied to that name, especially since, as a lot of people have pointed out, that the way she reacts to Loki makes it seem like a dead name. For those of you who don't know, dead names are in reference to a name that a trans person was assigned at birth before they could come into their real gender identity. And episode 4 created a lot more questions for Sylvie, and more specifically what her Nexus event was. Some people, inferencing from the fact that Sylvie hates being called Loki, is that she was born a girl, or began identifying heavily as a girl when she was a young age. Personally, I think that feels a bit anticlimactic for Sylvie as a character. Why I think that feels anticlimactic for her as a character is because Sylvie feels like the superior Loki, but to an extent. Why I'm calling her the superior Loki is because she's crafty and she's cunning in a way that can only be born out of necessity. Sylvie didn't grow up in this life of luxury like most Lokis did. She had to learn how to use these inherent Loki traits in a way that not only impresses Loki himself, but it impresses the whole TVA. And as we can see in episode 3, Loki has this fun playfulness to him that Sylvie is nothing but agitated by. And this is what sets her apart from being a Loki, is that she does have these inherent Loki traits, but she's had to learn how to adapt these traits because she's been on the run for her whole life. And she doesn't have the drama and the showmanship that we all know that Lokis live for, because she's focused. Sylvie's been running from the TVA for years, so she had to learn how to be quick, stealthy, and keep a low profile, while most other Lokis have done everything they can to get attention. Loki doesn't have that trait where she just needs attention, because for her, attention equals death. While Loki did have a neglectful childhood to an extent, he grew up knowing something that Sylvie barely had a chance to experience. For all of his family's faults, Loki was loved. Frigga adored her son, teaching everything that he now knows about magic. And Thor, even though he hasn't always expressed it right, he loves his brother more than anything. And we see that throughout the course of these movies, even after Loki did all of the bad stuff he did in the first Thor and in Avengers, these figures in his life still loved him, even though he was pushing them away. Speaking of Thor, both he and Loki are defined by their relationships with one another. You can't mention one without referencing the other. Their stories are so deeply entwined, which is another aspect where Sylvie differs. Thor becomes the hero that he is because of Loki. Every aspect of Thor's journey as a hero has been pushed forward by Loki. The frost giants on Asgard, which prompted Thor's fall from grace, Loki. Loki arriving on Earth to seemingly take over, Thor becomes an Avenger to stop him. After the events of Thor the Dark World, Thor believes Loki to be dead, and we know for a fact how much Thor mourned his brother. And Thor Ragnarok was essentially a love letter to their relationship, and how, in the end, they were prepared to take on those roles that they'd run from all those years ago. Thor fulfilling his destiny of becoming king of Asgard, and Loki accepting that, being nothing more than a brother to Thor and a right hand for this new journey that Thor was about to take as king. They were ultimately brothers again, with no tricks, no illusions separating them, and they were closer than they'd probably been in hundreds of years. Then, after Loki's real death in Avengers Infinity War, we know how much it devastated Thor, how it was the catalyst for a downward spiral. Thor and Loki are defined by their relation to each other, which prompts me to ask, did Sylvie have a Thor? I mean, presuming she grew up in Asgard, she did. But from what we've seen of Sylvie, she doesn't really have much of a connection to Asgard and her adoptive family. We know that Sylvie was informed that she was adopted, unlike our Loki, so maybe that revelation altered how Sylvie perceived her world. When Sylvie is picked up by the TVA, she's sitting by herself playing with toys. The reset charge wipes out those toys and whatever trace of deviation that Sylvie left on the sacred timeline. My first thought was, what if Sylvie was skipping an important event in the life of Loki? Why does she skip it? Well, my assumption is because she knows she's adopted, that she feels it's not important for her to be there. But that's a little vague. If I'm being honest, all I have when it comes to Sylvie is vague theories. The biggest thing that's been bothering me, though, is why Thor doesn't seem to have a role in Sylvie's life. And I know most of Sylvie's life was running, but she had to have formed relationships before she got arrested. Hopefully, we'll find out what her Nexus event was in the last 2 episodes. Speaking of Nexus events, we have to talk about the astronomical spike that Loki and Sylvie created when they thought they were going to die on that apocalyptic planet. Firstly, I do not accept that there were romantic vibes between them, because that's weird, because they're the same dang person. And you should not fall in love with yourself in that way, because that's just weird. Anyway, after rewatching the scene, I believe it to be a combination of things. For one, they're doing a bit of self-reflection out loud, which is not common for Loki. He likes to deflect, put up smoke and mirrors. And Sylvie wonders if what makes Loki a Loki is the fact that they're destined to lose, while Loki counters that Loki survive. As his evidence, he points out her story, the fact that she is essentially a miracle, a child who raised herself in apocalypses to one day take vengeance on the organization that just decided that she shouldn't exist. There isn't much dialogue after that, but that's when the branch starts spiking back at the TVA. Personally, I think the biggest thing here is that they're not alone. In almost all of the MCU, Loki is always alone. Even if he's not physically alone, he's still at distance, with secret plans and strategies. Think about how in Thor: The Dark World, when Thor thought that Loki died, but it was all an illusion, because Loki had a secret plan to take over the Asgardian throne. He was at distance there. And I could keep pointing out all the instances where this has happened in the MCU. Because a Loki is always protected by his secrets, his cunning plans, his inner world that no one knows about. However, in this moment with Sylvie, there are no secrets, there are no hidden plans, and unlike most Lokis, they're openly vulnerable with each other. They know they don't have an escape, they know there's no way out. And they hold hands because they're scared, but they're relieved that they're not alone. But then they're arrested by the TVA, their moment of true freedom from the organization gone. Also, not to flex, but I was right about the timekeepers not mattering. The one thing that I've learned about the MCU is that they like to build a scary villain that feels all-powerful, but that villain is usually just a smokescreen for the real villain. Think Wizard of Oz. That's usually the formula when MCU is building their villains for their movies. Specifically, this reveal feels like Iron Man 3, where the Mandarin is supposedly this big, ominous terrorist organization that no one can really pin down. People are afraid of them and would follow what they say, but when the curtains fall away, the Mandarin's just a patsy, with the real villain being someone a lot closer to home. I genuinely could not tell you who I think the villain is, because I have no idea. Where this Loki show differs from a lot of the other content that the MCU has put out is that in this Loki show, I genuinely have had no idea in the direction in which any of it has been going. Like, each episode has been a total, absolute surprise for me. But since we're here anyway, can we talk about Miss Minutes? Because as I was scripting this video, wondering and pondering who the real villain could be, I started thinking about Miss Minutes. I am suspicious of her. Especially since the actress for Miss Minutes, the voice actress, has stated that she's not allowed to talk about what her storyline is. She's not allowed to disclose that information. Why is she not allowed to disclose that information? Is it because she is behind the timekeepers? Or is she a spy for who the real alleged timekeepers are. I don't know, but I don't trust Miss Minutes. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was kind of a crazy tangent, but if you have made it this far, thank you for sticking it out with me. And if you have made it this far, I need you to go in the comments. Let me know all of your crazy theories. Get all Mephisto on me. You know what I'm saying? I need to know what you think the Nexus event between Loki and between Loki and Sylvie was caused by. I need to know what you think the Nexus event is that got Sylvie taken to the TVA. More specifically, why does Ravonna Renslayer say that she doesn't remember? I know that bitch remembers. And also, who do you think the main villain is? And don't say Mephisto, because, you know, Mephisto has burned us before, so I don't think it's Mephisto. In case you didn't know, that was a joke. But as always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week, where I will be doing journal pages for Black Widow, which I am watching this weekend, and I've been looking forward to for years and years. I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for this movie. Anyway, keep ignoring my tangents, but please subscribe, leave a like, and bye guys!